The rain hammered down on Fifth Avenue like bullets of ice, turning the pristine sidewalks into rivers of gray water that reflected the towering glass monuments to wealth and ambition. Marcus Holloway stepped out of his chauffeured Mercedes, his $2,000 Italian shoes finding purchase on the slick pavement as his assistant held an umbrella over his head. He was worth $3 billion, give or take a few $100 million depending on how the market closed that day, and he was late for a meeting that could make him even wealthier. The 48-year-old businessman had the kind of face that photographers loved, all sharp angles and cold determination, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that suggested wisdom rather than age. His suit was custom-tailored, his watch Swiss, and his reputation ruthless. Marcus Holloway had built an empire from nothing, or so the business magazines claimed. He'd clawed his way up from poverty to become one of the most powerful men in Manhattan, and he wore his success like armor. He barely noticed the homeless man huddled in the doorway of the building next to his office tower. There were hundreds of them in the city, maybe thousands, invisible people that the wealthy learned to look through as if they were ghosts. But something made Marcus glance at this particular man, something in the way he sat with his back against the cold stone, his thin frame wrapped in layers of dirty clothes, his face hidden behind a tangled gray beard. The homeless man looked up at exactly that moment, and their eyes met. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a strange flutter of recognition that made no sense. He'd never seen this man before. Of course he hadn't. Marcus Holloway didn't associate with people who lived on the streets. He quickened his pace, nodding curtly to the doorman who held the entrance open, and stepped into the warmth of his building's lobby, leaving the rain and the beggar behind. But the image of those eyes stayed with him as he rode the elevator to the 47th floor. There had been something in them, something that looked like knowledge, like the man had recognized him too. Marcus shook his head, dismissing the thought as ridiculous. He had a meeting to focus on, a deal to close, money to make. The day progressed in its usual rhythm of conference calls and contract negotiations, of numbers that grew larger and stakes that climbed higher. Marcus moved through it all with the practiced ease of a man who'd been playing this game for decades. His assistant brought him coffee at precise intervals, his lawyers briefed him on legal strategies, and his competitors called to probe for weaknesses they'd never find. By 6 o'clock, he'd secured a deal that would net his company another $150 million, and he felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with winning. But as he prepared to leave, his assistant mentioned something that derailed his thoughts completely. "Sir, there's a man downstairs who's been asking for you," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Security says he's homeless. They've asked him to leave 3 times, but he keeps coming back. He says he has something that belongs to you." Marcus frowned. "Tell security to call the police if he doesn't leave." "They're prepared to do that, sir." "But he mentioned a name. He said to tell you that Thomas Keller sent him." The room went very still. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face, felt his hands grip the edge of his desk until his knuckles went white. Thomas Keller. He hadn't heard that name in 27 years. Thomas Keller was dead. Thomas Keller had been dead since Marcus was 21 years old, since the night that had changed everything. "Sir." His assistant looked concerned. "Are you all right?" Marcus released his grip on the desk and straightened his tie, forcing his face back into its usual mask of control. "Have security bring him up." "Not to my office. Conference room B. And stay nearby." She nodded and left, clearly puzzled but too professional to ask questions. Marcus stood alone in his office, staring out at the New York skyline as the sun set behind the buildings, painting the glass towers in shades of orange and red. Thomas Keller. The name echoed through his memory like a ghost's whisper, bringing with it images and feelings he'd spent decades trying to bury. 10 minutes later, Marcus walked into the small conference room to find the homeless man from the street sitting at the table. Up close, he looked even worse than he had outside. His clothes were little more than rags layered one over another, his beard was matted and wild, and he smelled of the street, of dirt and rain and desperation. But his eyes, when he looked up at Marcus, were clear and intelligent, and filled with a sadness so profound it seemed to fill the room. Mr. Holloway, the man said, his voice rough but educated, the accent marking him as someone who'd once moved in different circles. Thank you for seeing me. Marcus remained standing, his arms crossed. You have exactly 2 minutes to explain why you're using a dead man's name to get into my building. The homeless man reached into the layers of his clothing and pulled out something wrapped in plastic. He placed it on the table with shaking hands. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, the plastic wrapping clearly added later to protect it from the elements. Marcus could see his own name written on the front in handwriting he recognized instantly, handwriting that made his throat tighten and his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. Thomas gave this to me before he died, the homeless man said. He made me promise to keep it safe, to deliver it to you when the time was right. He said I'd know when that was. Marcus stared at the envelope, unable to move, unable to speak. The handwriting belonged to Sarah Chen, the girl he'd loved more than life itself, the girl who'd died in the same accident that had killed Thomas Keller 27 years ago. The car crash that Marcus had walked away from without a scratch, the tragedy that had set him on the path to becoming the man he was today. Why now? Marcus managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Why wait 27 years? The homeless man smiled, a sad, knowing expression that transformed his weathered face. Because 27 years ago, you weren't ready to read it. You needed to become who you are first. Thomas knew that. Sarah knew that. They both knew you'd need to climb as high as you could before you could understand what she wrote. Marcus reached for the envelope with a hand that trembled. He'd thought he'd left that night behind, thought he'd processed the grief and the guilt and moved on. But holding Sarah's letter in his hands, he realized he'd done nothing of the sort. He'd simply run from it, built an empire as a wall between himself and the past, and convinced himself that success was the same thing as healing. Who are you? Marcus asked the homeless man. My name is David Chen, the man replied. Sarah's older brother. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He sank into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. David Chen. Sarah had talked about her brother constantly, the brilliant medical student who'd been her hero and her role model. Marcus had never met him. David had been studying abroad when Marcus and Sarah were together, and he'd been overseas when she died. I don't understand, Marcus said. You're a doctor. Sarah said you were going to be a surgeon. David's smile turned bitter. I was. For a while. And then my sister died, and I found I couldn't cut into people anymore without seeing her face. I started drinking to make it stop. Lost my license, my practice, my wife, my house. Everything. By the time I hit bottom, I had nothing left except the promise I'd made to Thomas in the hospital before he passed. Keep the letter safe. Give it to Marcus Holloway when destiny brought us together again. Marcus looked at the envelope in his hands, at Sarah's handwriting forming his name. He'd been 21 when she died, a college student with big dreams and no money, in love for the first time in his life with a girl who saw the world as a place of infinite possibility. She'd been an artist, a painter who could capture light and emotion on canvas in ways that made viewers weep. She'd believed in him when he had nothing, had told him he'd do great things someday. And then she'd gotten into Thomas Keller's car for what should have been a simple drive to a party, and she'd never come home. I need a moment, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. He looked at David, really looked at him, saw past the dirt and the rags to the broken man beneath. When did you last eat? David shrugged. Yesterday, I think. Maybe the day before. Marcus pulled out his phone and called his assistant. Have food sent to conference room B. A lot of food. And coffee. And get Dr. Martinez from legal up here. Tell him it's urgent. He ended the call and met David's questioning gaze. Dr. Martinez is a good friend. He runs a clinic downtown. We're going to get you cleaned up, fed, and into a proper rehab program. No arguments. Why? David asked, suspicion and hope warring in his expression. You don't owe me anything. No, Marcus agreed. But I owed your sister everything. And it's long past time I started paying that debt. He turned his attention back to the envelope, his fingers tracing the curves of Sarah's handwriting. For 27 years, he'd wondered what her last thoughts had been, whether she'd known the accident was coming, whether she'd been in pain. The letter might hold those answers, and he wasn't sure he was ready for them. But David was right about one thing. If he was ever going to read what Sarah had written, it had to be now, while her brother sat across from him, living proof that the past never really stayed buried no matter how many billions of dollars you stacked on top of it. He opened the envelope carefully, the old paper fragile in his hands. Inside was a single sheet, folded precisely, covered in Sarah's flowing script. The date at the top made his breath catch. She'd written it the morning of the day she died. The letter began without preamble, Sarah's voice coming through the words as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. Marcus, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're still here. I'm writing this on the morning of Tommy's party, and I have the strangest feeling that I need to say things I've been keeping inside. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'll laugh about this tomorrow and tear this letter up. But just in case, I need you to know some things. First, I love you. I love you in the way that songs are written about, in the way that makes everything else in the world seem small and distant. You're going to do amazing things, Marcus. I can see it in you, the hunger and the drive and the brilliant mind that never stops working. You're going to build something extraordinary. You're going to climb higher than either of us can imagine right now. But here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that you'll forget to stay human while you're climbing. I know you, Marcus. I know how you get when you set your mind on a goal. You become a machine, all focus and determination, and you stop seeing the people around you as anything more than obstacles or tools. You did it with your teen project last month. You did it during finals. You do it without even realizing it, and it scares me because I think that quality might take you exactly where you want to go, but it might also leave you completely alone when you get there. So I'm writing this as a reminder, a message in a bottle from me to the future version of you who's probably achieved everything he set out to do. I'm writing this to tell you that success without compassion is just expensive loneliness. Money without purpose is just heavy paper. Power without kindness is just another form of poverty. I hope you're happy, Marcus. I hope you found someone who loves you the way I do. I hope you've built the empire of your dreams. But I also hope you haven't forgotten what it feels like to be broke and hungry and desperate, because those feelings are what connect us to other people, what make us human. Don't let success turn you into someone who can't remember what struggle felt like. I've asked Tommy to keep this letter for you, to give it to you someday when you need it most. He'll know when that is. He's good at reading people, better than me even. And I've asked my brother David to help him keep it safe, to be the backup plan in case something happens to Tommy. Between the two of them, I trust that this will find you when the universe decides you're ready for it. Here's my challenge to you, Marcus Holloway. When you read this, when you've climbed as high as you're going to climb, I want you to look around and ask yourself an honest question: who have you brought with you? Not people you've hired or people who work for you, but people you've actually helped, actually lifted up, actually changed for the better just because you could. If the answer is no one, then you've climbed the wrong mountain, my love. You're going to want to make my death mean something, I know you. You're going to want to use it as fuel for your ambition, tell yourself that you're succeeding in my honor. Don't do that. Don't make me your excuse for being ruthless. That's not a memorial, that's a prison, and I won't be the bars you put around your own heart. Instead, do this: help one person. Really help them, not with a check or a donation or a tax write-off, but with your time and your attention and your actual presence. Find someone who's where you used to be, who's struggling and scared and convinced they'll never make it, and prove to them that they're wrong. Do it every year, on the anniversary of my death. That's how you honor my memory. That's how you make this mean something. I'm probably being morbid for no reason. I'll probably see you tonight at the party and we'll laugh about this. But if I don't, if this letter finds you years from now in some fancy office with a view of the city, then know that I believed in you, Marcus. I believed in the good man I knew, not just the successful one you wanted to become. I believed in your potential for kindness as much as your capacity for achievement. Don't prove me wrong. All my love, always and forever, Sarah. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his eyes burning, his chest tight with emotions he'd forgotten he was capable of feeling. When he finally looked up, David was watching him with an expression of understanding that needed no words. The food had arrived at some point, spread across the conference table, but neither of them had touched it. She knew, Marcus said softly. She knew exactly who I'd become. David nodded. Sarah always did have a gift for seeing people clearly. She saw you better than you saw yourself. Marcus stood and walked to the window, the letter still clutched in his hand. 47 floors below, the city teemed with life, with millions of people going about their evenings, each one carrying their own struggles and dreams. He'd spent 27 years looking down at them from his towers, seeing them as statistics, as markets, as opportunities. When was the last time he'd looked at another human being and really seen them, not as a means to an end but as an actual person? He thought about his life, about the empire he'd built. He had companies on 3 continents, investments in everything from tech startups to real estate. He had houses he'd never lived in, cars he'd never driven, art he'd never really looked at. He had employees by the thousands and competitors who feared him. He had wealth beyond measure and influence that could shape industries. And he had absolutely no one who truly knew him. No one he'd help just because he could. No one whose life was better simply because Marcus Holloway existed in the world. Tell me about your addiction, Marcus said, turning back to David. Tell me how you got from medical school to the street. David looked surprised by the question but answered honestly, his voice carrying the weight of years of pain. He talked about the drinking that started as a way to sleep, to quiet the images of Sarah's broken body that haunted him. He talked about the surgical mistake he'd made while impaired, the patient who'd nearly died, the license suspension that had become a revocation. He talked about his wife leaving, taking their daughter with her, about his descent into homelessness happening so gradually he didn't realize it was occurring until he was already at the bottom. I've tried to get clean, David said. Dozen times, maybe more. But every time I start to climb back up, I remember Sarah, and I wonder what's the point. She's still gone. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 15 years. My wife remarried a man who's everything I'm not. What exactly am I getting sober for? Marcus listened to it all, and in David's story, he heard echoes of his own journey, just in the opposite direction. They'd both been running from Sarah's death, both trying to escape the pain of losing her. David had run down while Marcus had run up, but they'd both been running, both been hiding from the truth that she was gone and wasn't coming back. Here's what you're getting sober for, Marcus said, moving back to the table and sitting across from David. You're getting sober because your sister believed in second chances. You're getting sober because somewhere in this city, there's a daughter who might want to know her father again someday. You're getting sober because you're a damn doctor, and the world needs doctors who understand what it's like to hit bottom. And you're getting sober because I'm going to help you, and I don't help people who don't help themselves. David's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Because 27 years ago, your sister loved me when I had nothing. She believed I could be great, and she was right. But she also warned me about who I might become in the process, and she was right about that too. I've spent nearly 3 decades building an empire and forgetting to build a life. I've made billions of dollars and haven't used any of it to actually help another human being, not really. I've been exactly the kind of successful, empty person she was afraid I'd become. Marcus picked up his phone and sent a series of texts, his fingers moving with the same decisive speed he used to close business deals. Dr. Martinez will meet you downstairs in 20 minutes. He runs the best addiction treatment program in the city, and you're going to be his newest patient. After you're clean and stable, we're going to talk about getting your medical license reinstated. I have lawyers who specialize in that kind of thing. We'll see what's possible. I can't pay you back, David said, his voice breaking. I don't want you to. This isn't a loan or a business transaction. This is me trying to be the person your sister thought I could be. This is me finally honoring her memory the right way. They talked for another hour, Marcus learning about Sarah's childhood, hearing stories about the sister he'd loved but never got to know as well as he'd wanted. David had been carrying the letter for 15 years, ever since Thomas Keller had died of cancer and passed the responsibility to him. He'd kept it safe through shelters and street corners, through winters that nearly killed him and summers that baked the city like an oven. He'd kept it safe because it was the last connection to his sister, and because he'd promised. How did you find me? Marcus asked. How did you know today was the day? David smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something that reminded Marcus achingly of Sarah. I saw you this morning, getting out of your car, and I saw the look on your face. You looked successful and miserable, powerful and empty. You looked exactly like the person Sarah was afraid you'd become. And I realized that if I didn't give you the letter now, I never would. Sometimes destiny doesn't come looking for you. Sometimes you have to recognize it when it shows up and have the courage to act. Dr. Martinez arrived as promised, a warm-faced man in his 60s who took one look at David and immediately shifted into physician mode. He asked questions about David's health, made notes on his phone, and arranged for a car to take them to the clinic. Marcus watched them prepare to leave and felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd been wearing for so long that he'd forgotten it wasn't actually part of his skin. Mr. Holloway, David said at the door, turning back one last time. Thank you. For Sarah. For me. For being who she hoped you'd be. After they left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room with Sarah's letter spread on the table before him. The food had gone cold, but he didn't care. He read her words again, hearing her voice in every line, feeling her presence in the room as clearly as if she were standing beside him. She'd been gone for 27 years, but her impact on his life was as strong now as it had been the day he met her. He thought about her challenge. Help one person every year. Really help them, with presence and time and actual attention. He thought about David Chen, the broken doctor he'd just committed to helping, and realized that it didn't feel like charity or obligation. It felt like purpose. For the first time in longer than he could remember, something felt more important than the next deal, the next acquisition, the next billion. Marcus pulled out his phone and started making calls. First to his lawyer, setting up a trust fund for David's treatment and recovery, enough to see him through rehab and the fight to restore his medical license. Then to his personal assistant, clearing his calendar for the next week. Then to his business partner, explaining that some things had come up and he needed time to handle them personally. Is everything all right? His partner asked, concern evident in his voice. Marcus looked at Sarah's letter, at her handwriting that had survived 27 years to reach him at exactly the moment he needed it most. No, he said honestly. But it's going to be. I've been climbing the wrong mountain, and it's time to change direction. Over the following days and weeks, Marcus discovered what it meant to actually be present in another person's life. He visited David at the treatment center, sat through group therapy sessions to better understand addiction, and listened to stories about Sarah that made her real again in ways that memory alone never could. He met with lawyers about reinstating medical licenses, researched second-chance programs for professionals in recovery, and learned the complex bureaucracy of redemption. But more than that, he started seeing the city differently. The homeless people on his street corner weren't invisible ghosts anymore. They were humans with stories, with pasts that had led them to their present, with potential futures that could be changed with the right intervention. He started recognizing his employees as people rather than resources, learning their names, asking about their lives, listening to their struggles. It wasn't comfortable. Success had insulated him from discomfort for so long that feeling it again was jarring. But Sarah's words kept echoing in his mind, success without compassion is just expensive loneliness. And he realized she was right. He'd been lonely for 27 years and had called it focus. He'd been empty and had called it dedication. He'd been becoming less human and had called it becoming more successful. 3 months after receiving Sarah's letter, Marcus stood in a courtroom watching as David Chen's medical license was conditionally reinstated. David had been sober for 90 days, had completed an intensive treatment program, and had passed every evaluation with flying colors. He still had years of supervised practice ahead of him, still had to prove himself worthy of the second chance he'd been given. But he had a chance, and that was everything. "Thank you," David said afterward, his eyes clear and bright in a way they hadn't been when Marcus first met him. He'd put on weight, cut his beard, started looking like the respected physician he'd once been. "For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "Thank your sister," Marcus replied. "She's the one who taught me that success means nothing if you reach the top alone." That evening, Marcus went to the cemetery for the first time in 27 years. He'd avoided it deliberately, unable to face the reality of Sarah's death, preferring to keep her alive in memory rather than acknowledging the grave that held her body. But he went now, carrying flowers and her letter, and sat on the grass beside her headstone as the sun set behind the city skyline. "I'm sorry it took me so long," he said to the stone, to the memory, to the universe that had kept her letter safe for all these years. "I'm sorry I became exactly who you were afraid I'd become. But I'm going to do better now. I'm going to help people, really help them, the way you asked me to. I'm going to make my success mean something more than just numbers in a bank account." The wind rustled through the trees, and Marcus could almost hear Sarah's laugh, could almost feel her hand on his shoulder. She'd known him so well, had understood that he needed to climb as high as he could before he could understand what really mattered. She'd known he needed to have everything before he could realize that having everything meant nothing without someone to share it with, without purpose beyond profit, without compassion to balance ambition. Marcus established the Sarah Chen Foundation the following month, dedicating a substantial portion of his wealth to helping professionals in recovery, funding second-chance programs, supporting addiction treatment centers. He started spending 1 day a week at Dr. Martinez's clinic, not writing checks but actually being present, talking to patients, learning their stories, helping where he could. He restructured his companies to prioritize employee well-being alongside profits, implemented programs to help workers with everything from childcare to education to mental health support. His business partners thought he'd lost his mind. His competitors saw weakness. But his employees saw him as human for the first time, and productivity actually increased as people felt valued rather than used. David Chen became the medical director of the foundation's treatment program, bringing his experience of addiction and recovery to help others navigate the same treacherous waters. He reconnected with his daughter, a slow and painful process of rebuilding trust that had been shattered by years of absence and broken promises. Marcus was there for the first meeting, sitting in his car outside the coffee shop, available if David needed support but staying out of the way to let father and daughter find their own path back to each other. On the first anniversary of receiving Sarah's letter, Marcus took David back to the street corner where they'd first crossed paths. They stood in the rain, as they had a year ago, but everything was different now. David was sober and healthy, practicing medicine again, rebuilding relationships he'd thought were lost forever. And Marcus was wealthy and successful but no longer empty, no longer alone in his tower looking down at a world he didn't really see. "She would be proud of you," David said, his voice carrying above the rain. "Both of us, really. We're both better than we were." Marcus nodded, thinking about Sarah's words, about her challenge to help one person every year, to bring people with him as he climbed. He'd helped David, and through David, he'd helped dozens of others through the foundation. He'd started seeing his success as a responsibility rather than a reward, as an opportunity to lift others rather than just elevate himself. But he also knew it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Every person he helped reminded him of how many more needed help, how many were struggling and scared and convinced they'd never make it. Sarah's challenge wasn't something that could be completed and checked off a list. It was a way of living, a fundamental reorientation of what success actually meant. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at the photo he'd saved as his wallpaper. It was Sarah's letter, photographed and preserved, a reminder of who he'd been and who he was trying to become. He read the words that had become his North Star: success without compassion is just expensive loneliness. He thought about the businessman he'd been a year ago, so focused on his empire that he'd stopped seeing the people who built it, so determined to climb higher that he'd forgotten why he was climbing at all. That man had been successful by every conventional measure, but he'd also been exactly the kind of person Sarah had been afraid he'd become. And he thought about the man he was now, still successful but with a different definition of what that meant. A man who understood that wealth was meaningless without purpose, that power was worthless without compassion, that climbing to the top meant nothing if you did it alone. "Thank you," Marcus said to David, but he was really speaking to Sarah, to the letter she'd written 27 years ago, to the wisdom she'd possessed even at 21. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even after you were gone." They stood together in the rain, two men who'd been saved by the same person in different ways, connected by the ghost of a girl who'd understood that destiny wasn't about where you ended up but about who you became along the way. The city moved around them, millions of stories unfolding in every direction, each one carrying its own potential for tragedy and redemption, for falling and rising, for losing your way and finding it again. Marcus looked up at his tower, at the office where he'd built his empire, and saw it differently now. It wasn't a monument to his success. It was a launching point for something better, a platform from which he could reach down and pull others up, a place where wealth could be transformed into purpose and profit could become compassion. He thought about the year ahead, about the people he would help, the lives he would touch, the differences he would make. He thought about Sarah's challenge to bring people with him as he climbed, and he realized that he hadn't finished climbing at all. He'd just been going in the wrong direction. True success wasn't measured in dollars or buildings or power. It was measured in the number of people whose lives were better because you existed in the world. And for the first time in 27 years, Marcus Holloway felt like he was finally heading in the right direction. Not up, but outward. Not alone, but connected. Not successful despite his humanity, but successful because of it. The letter had found him exactly when he needed it, delivered by a homeless man on a rainy street corner, kept safe for decades by people who believed in second chances and the possibility of redemption. It had crossed the years like a message in a bottle, riding the currents of fate and circumstance until it reached the shore of Marcus's life at precisely the moment when he was ready to receive it. That was destiny, Marcus realized. Not a predetermined path that you followed helplessly, but a series of chances and choices that led you exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you needed to be there. Sarah had known he would need her words someday, had trusted that they would find him when the time was right. And they had, changing everything, redirecting the course of his life towards something that actually mattered. As the rain continued to fall on Fifth Avenue, as the city lights began to glow in the gathering dusk, Marcus made a silent promise to the memory of the girl who'd loved him, who'd believed in him, who'd seen past his ambition to the person he could become. He would spend the rest of his life proving her right, helping others the way he'd helped David, using his success as a tool for lifting people up rather than a wall to separate himself from the world. The letter had kept for years, waiting for its moment. And when that moment came, when a beggar crossed paths with a powerful businessman on a rainy New York street, destiny had done its work. Two men had been saved by words written long ago by a woman who'd understood that the true measure of success wasn't how high you climbed, but who you brought with you on the way up. Marcus folded the umbrella and stood in the rain, letting it wash over him, feeling more alive than he had in decades. Somewhere, he hoped, Sarah was watching. Somewhere, he hoped, she knew that her letter had done exactly what she'd intended it to do. It had reminded him how to be human. And in the end, that was the only success that truly mattered.